Welcome to Language Access Matters, the podcast that dives deep into the crucial role of language access in public services and businesses. I am your host, Carol Velandia, and I invite you to join me on a journey of discovery and empowerment. Language access is not just a matter of convenience. It is a fundamental human right and the key that unlocks doors to essential services and opportunities. In this podcast, we'll explore the far-reaching impact of language access, examining how it shapes not only healthcare, justice, and education, but also the world of business. Through thought-provoking interviews, insightful discussions, and compelling stories, we will unveil the power of language access. We will hear from professionals who bridge communication gaps to provide quality care for diverse communities. We will explore the intersection of language, law, and justice, and the crucial role that interpreters and translators play in ensuring fair and equitable treatment. We will delve into the challenges and innovations, as well as how language access opens doors to effective communication and inclusion, and how it makes our society more equitable. But our exploration doesn't stop there. We will also uncover the profound impact of language access in the world of business. We will hear from entrepreneurs, industry leaders, and experts who understand the value of inclusive and effective communication and how it drives success in today's global marketplace. Language Access Matters is your platform to understand the significance of language access in these vital sectors of society. We will shed light on the barriers faced by individuals and communities and the innovative solutions that promote inclusion and equality. Whether you are a healthcare professional, a legal expert, an educator, a business owner, a linguist, an advocate, or simply passionate about the power of language, this podcast is for you. Together, we will navigate the challenges, celebrate the victories, and advocate for a world where language access truly matters. So, join me on this enlightening journey as we uncover the impact of language access in healthcare, justice, education, and businesses. Let's amplify the voices of the 25 million people that don't speak English in the United States and those that don't speak the dominant language around the world. Those voices deserve to be heard and empowered, and we need to empower ourselves to build a more inclusive future. Welcome to Language Access Matters. Let's embark on this transformative exploration together. Language Access Matters is the podcast where we spotlight the people, ideas, and innovations working to make effective communication a human right. Today's episode is a special one for me because my guest is not only a leader in language technology space, but also a fascinating, multi-talented human being.
Well, you're buttering me up right from the beginning, Carol.
From the very beginning.
Good job.
I don't know if you remember, Stefan, we met for the first time in Peru in 2024 at the Vamos Juntos conference.
And I've made lots of friends. I've made lots of friends at Vamos Juntos over the last couple of years. Lots of wonderful people in the localization space in Latin America. It's one of my favorite conferences, but I'm already interrupting and we haven't gotten started yet. Go ahead. Don't let me interrupt you.
No, it's fine. I would tell you that what impressed me about you when I met you in 2024, it was not only the expertise about the language industry, but also your creativity. You showed me some of your paintings and you talked about strategy. We talked about a variety of topics. So I am going to tell the audience a little bit about Stefan Huyghe, who is a recognized thought leader at the intersection of artificial intelligence and localization, with over 25 years of experience shaping global content strategy. He currently is a vice president at Communicaid Language Solutions in Silicon Valley. He is the founder of AI in Loc newsletter,
and host of the Agile Localization Podcast by Crowding, where he regularly interviews leading innovators in the language industry. He's helping companies reimagine how they communicate at scale, not just localizing content, but building the infrastructure that makes global communication effective and inclusive from the ground up. He's also been at the forefront of integrating AI into translation workflows, bringing clarity to complex issues like infrastructure, contextual nuance, and sustainable cost strategies. And importantly, Stefan is a champion of linguists, ensuring that translators, technologists, and data specialists are equipped to shape the future of communication. So I'm very excited about.
You're making me feel really good this morning. And keep on, or this afternoon. You can keep on going just like that. I'm feeling better already. But
Yes, but Stefan, one of the things I want to mention is that I did struggle a bit, and I will talk a little bit about this because to me, technology and advocacy seem like two different worlds. So today, I'm hoping to explore how innovation and ethics, operations and equality can come together to build a future where communication is not just fast or scalable, but also fair and human. So with that, I would love to welcome you to Language Access Matter. Stefan, I would love for you to tell me your story. How did you start in the language industry? What was that journey like? And what got you started? Tell me all about your journey.
I wish I could tell you that there was a brilliant master plan to get started in the localization industry, but it was a sheer coincidence. Although my life has been shaped at every major turn by languages, and maybe the pre-story to my localization life is perfectly shaped as well to end up here. So maybe it wasn't that big of a coincidence, but I essentially had a friend who just started working at a localization firm in San Francisco called eTranslate. They later became translations.com and now are part of the TransPerfect company or family. And one day she was telling me a story, how she was looking for somebody who spoke perfect English and French to come help her start the French office of eTranslate in Paris, and she couldn't find anybody. And as we were having a drink together, I started thinking, hey, I could be that guy, but I speak fluent French and English. And so a couple of weeks later, I found myself in Paris, and that's how I got started in 1999 in the localization industry. And that incident was a pure coincidence, but certainly my upbringing connected me with languages from a very young age. I grew up in Belgium in the first instance, but my dad moved the family to Switzerland in my teens. And there I attended an American school. I lived in the French part of Switzerland, went to school in the German part of Switzerland at an American school. Those are the four languages I speak fluently, Dutch being my native, and then German, French, and English. And I'm learning a little bit of Spanish too, but I haven't really been confident enough to bust it out with so many people that speak Spanish without any issue in the localization industry. So this anchors my story a little bit from the beginning into language access for sure. And my perspective on language was always a perspective of niche skill sets that can change anything that you're doing in a professional environment. I think so much of the success of my professional success is thanks to the languages that I speak, although it wasn't by design at the outset. my language has always opened doors for me. Even at a young age, when I was a tour guide in Greece for a summer there, the reason I got to do that is because I spoke the languages that I spoke, and because I could address the guests that would come on tours with me in the languages that I spoke. And so even later on, when I came to the United States, the fact that I spoke fluent English obviously helped me a lot. So for me, languages has always opened up doors and given me opportunities that I most likely otherwise would have never had if I didn't speak the languages.
I love that because it's such a nice message to tell to young people and immigrants everywhere. Not only concern yourselves about speaking the language of the country where you're moving to, but keep the language, your heritage language. I think that that's one of the issues with a lot of first generation, second generation, is that they end up losing the language their parents spoke. So that is sad. And look at your story. It opens so many doors for you here and elsewhere.
I've felt very strongly about that. I from my son's turning 20. I'm dating myself, but my son's turning 20 this year, and I have to say I have from the first day he was born, I was determined that he would at least be bilingual, and so I've raised him in French, and he's fluent in English and French now, and I think that's it. It's such an easy, it's not always easy to pass it on because you have to stand out in a different culture. You know, when I would speak French with my son at a soccer game and all the parents would be looking at me, that's not necessarily something that's fun in the moment, but I always thought it was such an easy gift for me to give him that it almost would be criminal if I would selfishly keep that to me and not pass it on, so to speak, because the only thing I was required again is to maybe look a bit silly in front of other people once in a while, but that's an ego thing, and nobody cares in the end. And now that he speaks fluent French, is one of these things that is a niche skill that can actually open up doors later on in ways that he would never expect. He's studying to become a pilot. Maybe he wants to go fly planes in the French West Indies. I'm just saying something. The fact that he would speak French there could open up a door that otherwise would never be available to him. So that's my perspective on language, and it certainly played a giant role in my life.
In fact, you're using your language skills now professionally. So why don't you tell us about today, bring us to today and what you are doing today with your language skills?
Well, obviously, I think once I got involved in localization, the language skills started playing a much bigger professional role than they ever had in the past. And having this multifaceted cultural and linguistic background has helped me tremendously in the localization space, communicating with customers, but also understanding where misunderstandings would come from, or cultural nuances play in things in relationships on a daily basis, so to speak. So it was definitely an advantage for me to be used to, the differences in culture still come up almost on a daily basis when you're dealing with an international crowd like we do all the time. And it's funny. I think when you're moving away from your country of heritage, I think in a way you learn how to evaluate it much more objectively than if you're still living on site. I don't know whether you have the same experience, but I see very clear European traits right now when I look back to Northern Europe, to my own people, the Flemish and the Dutch for that matter as well. They're super direct, and it makes me laugh sometimes now because I can recognize that trait within people's personalities when they're not aware of it at all. Does that make sense?
Yes,
They might not be self-aware of how direct they really are. And I just had a really go ahead.
No, I think traveling shaped the way we understand languages and culture, and when we learn other languages while in the country where we're visiting, which to me is a magnificent experience that allows us to get into that culture. And if we're lucky to travel and live elsewhere, and then look at our own culture from different glasses, right? Different cultural glasses, we are able to perceive it differently. So I have a similar experience from living in South Korea and then coming to the United States and sort of auto-analyzing my Latin culture, if you will, and see all the different the differences that we have, and also the similarities, right? The way we conceive, for example, etiquette, right? Table etiquette, I mean, in different parts of the world, or the way we communicate, as you say, like the directness versus in Colombia, for example, we're not direct at all. We first beat around the bush a lot by asking a lot of questions about, how are you? How is your daughter? How is your son? And then at the very end of the conversation, so this is what I actually wanted to ask you, right? So contrasting that has been sort of like a lifelong fascination for me. So.
Yeah, the culturally for me, but I recognize the patterns a lot easier. And that's kind of what I was saying too, is that I know what to expect with different cultures a lot better because I recognize the patterns, and it's a big advantage that I think if you don't have this multifaceted cultural background, you don't really have, because you just think that everybody thinks the same way, and you don't nearly recognize it in the same fashion.
So how would you
I digress.
That you understand language not only as this business tool, right? Or rather, help me understand how you devise language first as a business tool, and then how can we talk about language as just the basic human connector that it is?
Yeah, I think there's the two aspects that contrast one another very, very well. Language is a tool that helps with efficiency and business transactions and workflows, and helps commercial goals getting accomplished. And then it's also a connector that is rooted in empathy and trust and belonging and identity and a lot of feelings, so to speak. So speaking French with my son for 18 years wasn't just about efficiency. It was also about building connection and identity, and giving him this multifaceted American and also European root. I would put him in soccer camp when he was a teenager in Switzerland, when we were there for a month, and he would go play soccer with the French kids for a number of weeks. And so that's that kind of thing, I think it's important from an identity and a belonging point of view as well, so that he understands not just the American way, but the European way as well, if that makes any sense.
So it's less likely that you or your son face language barriers anywhere in the world because you know so many languages by now.
So that's kind of, it's an interesting dichotomy, because a lot of times when I hear people talk about language access, it's not something that seems completely natural to me, in the sense that I've always felt like studying languages was like one of my number one responsibilities. If I wanted to live in the United States, the only way I was going to be successful here is if I would try to integrate as much as possible. That's a little bit contradictory, I think, with the concept of language access and just providing all languages to anybody in any way, shape, or form. Not that that's not a noble goal, but certainly from a personal perspective, I've always felt like if I was going to live somewhere, then the first aim for me personally should be to be able to integrate as much as possible, because I'm a guest in that country, and not speaking the language is a big part of that, in my opinion.
In fact, I love that you bring that up, because one of the issues that we have to consider is how easy is the access to learning the language of the particular country. And some countries are better than others about teaching the language. So, for example, my sister, who moved to Canada many, many years ago, but then within Canada, she moved to Montreal. She spent, I think, 6 months in Montreal learning French. And I think it was 6 hours a day or 8 hours a day that she had to take classes sponsored by the government. And so as a result, within 6 months, she was able to speak conversational French. And obviously now she's fluent, and she learned it as an adult. So I think this thing of learning as an adult versus children, really, when you set out to do it and you have all the environment and the resources to do it, you end up doing it. So an aspect of accessibility is like either you provide the access to learn the language of the country, or you offer other methods, right? And I think that's part of the conversation. But I think it's a very important point that if you are going to a country one of your priorities should be learning the culture and learning the language. So, yeah, I don't think there is a disagreement on that. I think that we can see sort of the full spectrum of what it means to not only learn, enabling people to learn the language of the country, but also providing language accessibility. And language accessibility defined as a ramp, which I think it was the analogy I made even in one of the podcasts that we had together, a ramp to access services, right? So I don't think they're contradictory. I think that your perspective just is a part of
They're complementary. I agree with you. And it's fascinating to hear your sister's story, because there's an overlap there that I quickly wanted to highlight too. I bet there's an overlap. I'm not 100% sure, but I was actually telling somebody this story today. When my parents decided to move to Switzerland, and we were going to live in the French part of Switzerland, and I was going to go to school in English, I had school knowledge of both of those languages, but I certainly didn't speak them fluently. And speaking is so much of the barrier to entry. I think a lot of times people have book knowledge, but they're really uncomfortable speaking up, so to speak. And my parents did a really wonderful thing. That summer, me and my sister took classes every work day of the week for a couple of hours with a teacher. And the teacher had the instruction was at the Berlitz school, and the teacher got the instructions from my parents not to do any book English or French, no writing, it was just speaking. So all we did for that whole summer is have conversations and making lots of mistakes and getting corrected. And by the end of the summer, we weren't perfect maybe, but the fear of speaking had come down tremendously. And I think that that's really a big thing. And immersion is probably still the best way of progressing in a language. And your sister's story sounds like it's an immersion story too, where you're thrown in the deep end, and you have to work with the oars that you have, so to speak. You have to row the boat with the oars that you have, and make it work, and then learn from your mistakes.
Absolutely. And as our listeners know by now, this podcast tries to bring different perspectives to the table, because solving the challenges of language access, in my opinion, is not only about one aspect, right? And this is exactly why I invited you, because I think as you know, right, we wanted, or I wanted to find points of intersection between localization and language access, and how these connect with civil rights and inclusion. And I think that even at some point when we were talking, we joked about like, oh my God, maybe these are two very different topics and we should stick to our own lanes. But I think that the more globalized we become, and that with different shifts in our world, in our culture, in technology, everything that's happening with AI, I kind of want to. I think that there are points of connection between you and I, between our different perspectives. So I want to explore a little bit of that and ask you, from your perspective as an expert in localization, how do you think localization overlaps with language access, and where is completely different?
I think both aim to remove the language barriers so people can access information and services and have immersed experiences. Both rely on things like translation, interpretation, cultural adaptation. Localization looks at the issue from a business tech perspective, adapting products, software and content to different markets, and it focus on the user experience, brands, workflow efficiencies. Language access is rooted more in, like you said, the legal aspect of this, the human rights and equity, and the goal is to ensure that people are understood or can be understood and have essential tools to be understood in all aspects of life that are public, from schools to hospitals to courts. And the focus is on inclusion and fairness, so to speak. I think when it's done right, localization, it improves the global customer access. And when done right, language access ensures people aren't excluded from society, and that's what ties them together in a common theme of human dignity. So
yes, because I coming from the social, from social studies, I am a social worker, and I made my way into the language industry. And what my perception is that it is very similar, localization, language access is just that it's used in different segments of. So we talk about localization like sort of in the private industry, and how do you localize certain documents so that potential clients understand what they're buying, for example. And language access, in a way, we don't talk about clients or customers, but about people. How do you communicate effectively? So I think both are not necessarily separate, are actually very similar. It's just that
it would be very good to think about them as clients, in a certain fashion, and to look at it from a business user experience perspective as well, because so much of the user experience is exactly that. The fact that you can be helped in a very efficient way, that you don't have to feel frustrated about not being understood or making yourself understandable.
Exactly. I think that, in fact, the public services have a lot to learn from the private sector. I remember listening to a talk about how they did the translations for Subway. And I was like, oh my God, I mean, this company really went out of their way to make sure that the ingredients in their sandwiches were understood everywhere. And meanwhile, we're questioning whether or not a hospital should have a human interpreting for another human, right? So it's like, why can't we apply this concept that we use so well with a sandwich to a human, and and we would actually do a better job? Because I think the standard is actually higher when we talk about localization and in the private sector sometimes that when we talk about how to provide language access, and of course that's not everybody, but sometimes you will hear people saying, "Oh yeah, just use Google Translate." Just yesterday, I went to the court, as I am here in Maryland right now, and one attorney, I was interpreting for that court, and I just wanted to sort of see what was going on after a long time I have not interpreted. And the attorney had no issues using Google Translate to explain a plea agreement. I'm like, oh my God, this is not the way we should do this kind of thing. Of course, the gentleman didn't understand, not because the language was not clear. Google Translate, which I didn't verify, probably was doing a good job, but it was that disconnect. This person was worried they were about to get into the court, and Google Translate is not going to cut it when it comes to a plea agreement. And it was just a traffic violation. It wasn't even a huge kind of plea agreement with a lot of implications. It was small. The stakes were low. And,
I think what you're explaining is something that draws the line between private business and the public instances that we're dealing with language access. I think from a localization point of view, private businesses will quickly realize that these linguistic inefficiencies actually cost a lot of money. Mm-hmm. They cost them a lot of money in unclosed business because customers are not interested if they can't be serviced in their own language. They cost them money because it takes a lot longer to service somebody and to do tech supports if they can't be helped in the language that they want to be helped in, all those types of things. And in the public sector, those inefficiencies are not necessarily addressed in the same way because the inefficiencies don't have the same repercussions per se that they would have on the bottom line when you're dealing with a private owner, so to speak. And before we get into a political discussion about this, I think that's kind of the root why there's these two aspects. They're two sides of the same coin, really. Language access and localization in this sense. I
agree.
It's very, very close.
It's very close. And I think one of the shifts in our society now is that the incursion of AI and automation and how this is transforming translation. So from your perspective, how do you make sure that these tools don't widen the gaps, but instead support equitable access for all languages and communities?
So I think on the whole, I feel very, very positive. I'm a glass half full guy when it comes to AI and the evolution towards it. I think there was never enough budget for us to provide translation in all instances and with a lot of the content that is getting localized right now. And because of a lot of the automation in our industry, the costs are coming down tremendously. And also some of the other barriers like turnaround time, etc., they're coming down and make it so that the consumer is actually going to reap the benefit of that. And in the end, that's what's really most important, that we can service our customers, whether they're in the private or the public sector, in the most efficient way. So I think there's tremendous opportunity to do multilingual services in a way that they've never been tried before because of the restrictions that were in place.
And are there any risks to adopting AI in translation? And I mean only AI, for example?
Yeah, of course, there are a number of risks that we have to take into account and we'll have to work around. The challenge, one of the challenges that we have is training of models on lesser well-known languages, so to speak, or languages for which the data set is a lot smaller than in some of the larger languages. there's ways around that, and scientists are figuring out ways to do synthetic data sets that can help us get out of that jam, so to speak. Obviously, there's other dangers like governance that come to mind when it comes to AI, and I think that's something we'll struggle with for the foreseeable time. That's not just something that is playing in the localization industry alone. The governance issue is something that we should be worrying about in other industries just the same, so to speak. And that's kind of a generalized AI problem. How far, what guardrails do we need to have to set in place in order for AI to not become the AI of the Space Odyssey 1999, where it starts going rogue, so to speak. So certainly for our industry, one of the complications we're going to have to figure out is what the role of the linguists is going to be, and there's lots of trepidation around that. When I think about this problem, though, I try to get a history reference, and I've always been very interested in history, so that plays well for me to think about the problem in that way. So I'm always kind of looking back to see what kind of similarities that I can find in the past. And just recently, I read something about the weavers in 19th century England that were up in arms and protesting because with the industrialization of the English weaving industry, a lot of the hand weaving was being replaced by machines. And so there was a lot of resistance against that. And people were violently resisting that much in a much bigger way, maybe than you'd see the resistance against AI for the time being. But in the end, it's not because we started machine weaving that the opportunity disappeared. There were other opportunities to be involved in the same business, so to speak. And I think that's just the evolution, which frankly, I've been in the localization industry for 26 years now. In the first couple of weeks I started in the localization industry, I was already told that this was really not a very good business to be involved in for the future, because translation memory was going to, replace us within a couple of years, and machine translation would take over and we would all be out of a job. I think the reality of what's happening right now is that the sliver of content that is being touched by humans is getting thinner and thinner. However, the amount of content, the segment that is being handled, is growing exponentially. So while we're looking at 0.5 or 0.4, 0.3% of content in the world that's being touched by humans, that segment is growing exponentially just with the amount of content that is being touched. So I think there's, for a long time to come, there will be need for linguists. Will they be doing exactly the same thing that they're doing right now? Probably not, but they'll be using tools. And for 25 years, linguists have been adapting to new tools all along the way, from the early translation memory tools to the agentic AI right now. So I think we're not tilling the land with horse and carriage anymore. We're switching to new tools, and things are going to evolve in the same fashion.
Well, I would like to perhaps try to imagine and ask the question sort of in a different way. What would humans be doing with translation, rather? That's part of my question. And the other part is if you can explain what's agentic AI.
Yeah, so I think it directly ties into agentic AI. For the past maybe 3 years or so, ever since ChatGPT was born in November of 22, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I think so.
we've had hands-on experience with using AI with natural language prompting, in which we went from just feeding in a couple of keywords. If you think how the searching has changed tremendously over these last couple of years too, if 5 years ago, if you did a search on Google, you would feed in a couple of keywords and you would try to fish out the right query out of thousands of results that Google would rank for you in its way. As where now you can actually reason with an LLM and have a conversation and fish out the information in a completely different way. Agentic AI is the next step of this process, in which we're going to be completely working in a different way. And I predict the future not too long from now, where we will all be working with agentic AI in a very personalized way. I think this is something that's happening in our industry, in the localization industry as well. We've always aimed to be as personalized as possible. And what originally started as personalization for a region maybe, or for a specific dialect, is now going to be going much further down into personal preferences in a way we've never seen before. And when we're using tools, agentic AI actually makes it so that you can employ the large language model in order to do autonomous tasks that are independent and that can maybe be used in a serial way as well. So you're going to be able to design your own agents as, say, somebody that works as a linguist. You're going to be able to give your LLM a certain set of tasks and have it complete those tasks autonomously without having to supervise it in the mechanical way that we've always been used to for the past maybe 25, 30 years, since we've started working with computers in a more adamant fashion. We've always been used to having to give very, very specific instructions, as where now we're going to be able to create our own agents and have them do certain aspects of our work. And you can already see it a little bit. I don't know whether you've noticed it, but some of the larger companies like Microsoft are bringing AI agents to say things like email, where you can instruct your agent to go sift through your emails and maybe give you summaries or filter out the most important messages that you need to follow up with. That's the first ripple towards that evolution. I think we're going to see lots of customization like that. So this is interesting. I'm going to tie it back to the translators now, because so that it becomes a little bit more tangible, I think, for people when they're listening to this. I think for translators in particular, the most successful translators and linguists in the industry are going to be those that have specializations that can be very, very valuable to guide something to a specific goal, so to speak. But just like you were working with tools that would take over certain aspects of your activities, I think a lot of the mind-numbing things that we do on a regular basis are going to be replaced by agentic AI in some way, shape, or form. And it's going to make things a lot easier, I think, for people.
So we might be looking into a job that, or the prospect of an employee that does translation, for example, might look like maybe fewer hours actually translating, much like fewer hours, but then freeing up time to do what? Like, you have to be creative with all that time that you're gonna be free now, right? And that's one of the questions I have, because I do use AI for different things. I have created a couple of agents, if you will, or and I'm only sort of like dipping my toes into. And the question behind it is like, okay, now I have all this time. How am I going to use this time to be a better person, a better professional? So I guess that's the bigger question. Is like, okay, now how are you going to use your time? Of course, a lot of people are concerned about losing their job and adding value to their own work, right? And I think this is where the heavy thinking has to come in, because AI is going to make things easier, but then how are you going to use your brain?
I just think you're going to be more efficient in whatever it is that you end up doing. So maybe you're an expert in patent law for, electrical machines, something. When you're processing, or when you work processing content in the past, you would do it one way. Now you're probably not going to be reviewing everything. You might get 1,000-page document that gets carved up, and you're just the agents are going to run through the document and serve you up the issues that need human resolve. And you're going to be doing that kind of thing. I can't completely predict, just like anybody, I think what part of the job will remain and how it will change exactly. But I can see my own activities changing and adapting over time. In my content creation activities, for example, I can process a lot more volume of activities right this moment than I would be able to do 5 years ago, just because I'm being helped in a lot of ways by automation that I'm employing. And I think
definitely, like productivity will increase. My hope, though, is that we use the human aspect of ourselves much more. So, for example, with interpretation specifically, I did foresee that the profession was much more than just being a linguist, that the interpreter had to use their human skills to actually support language accessibility in different ways, things that are not found in a dictionary. And I wonder if translators can, and that if you can say the same about translators as it relates to language accessibility or not,
I'm not sure that I have the answer that I have the answer to that. What I think one thing is sure though, but that's not been any different in the last 25 years. If we're honest with ourselves, all linguists have had to adapt continuously. Nobody's working the way they were working 10 years ago. There's maybe a tiny sliver of people that have always worked in the same way. Once in a while, I stumble across somebody that has never used any translation memory, for example. It exists, I'm sure it does, and maybe it will continue to exist in a certain way. I remember in 2000, I made a cold call to a law office, and I was asking to follow up via email, and they told me that the lawyer didn't use any email because then it would be too stressful to have to reply to it right away. So really? That's a true story that happened. So I'm sure that on some level, some people will continue to work like nothing's happened, like nothing's changed. But I think overall, we're going to be doing different things as linguists, and there'll be other opportunities that we haven't even thought about that are going to come across. I just recently wrote an article in my AI and Loc newsletter about data annotation and the opportunities that there are in the localization industry for LSPs in particular to pivot into data annotation, which is essentially labeling of content for the AI space, because there's lots of demand there. And we're essentially, as an agency model, set up to have people involved in that aspect of the industry as well. The immediate criticism you hear, of course, is that will be, not nearly a sophisticated type of work as translation would be. I'm not so sure. It might be rewarding on some level too. I think that there's going to be new opportunities for people, but we have to adapt and adjust.
We definitely do have to adapt and adjust. And along with the opportunities for linguists, I think that linguists and companies. So I want you to help me see the future where every company and government agency adopted, for example, agentic AI mindset. What would that mean for communities who are often left out due to language barriers?
So I think in the end, there is no business owner or not even an authority that purposely likes to disenfranchise a segment of their audience or clientele. So in the end, we all have an aim of being as service-oriented as possible to whatever clientele that we are servicing. And with the technological capabilities that we are having, I think there's a lot more opportunity to bridge some of the gaps that there are right now. So in the end, I think that's a positive thing for language accessibility, because I think the gap to bridge is going to be made a lot smaller in the future. Will all languages at all times be available? Maybe not. But I think we'll come to accept being able to be serviced in, tons of languages, much more, and those languages will be much more readily available in the future, because the barrier to entry for that service model is gonna drop a lot lower, and maybe it won't all be, the best quality, but at least people will be able to communicate a lot better, I think.
Agree. Thank you, Stefan. And I think this conversation had made it clear to me that the reason why I wanted to invite you to the podcast, because for a long time, as you know, I thought that localization and language access were two very different things. And one was focused on sort of adapting products and services for global markets, whereas language access was all about policy and ensuring equity and rights for people who don't speak the dominant language. But obviously, through the conversation today, I think that you've said it really well. They are two sides of the same coin.
Same coin, yes. I truly believe that. Carol, thank you so very much for having me on the podcast. And I can't believe we've already talked almost 50 minutes.
I know.
You were worried about me not being able to talk 50 minutes. Little did you know, huh?
Yeah, so thank you, Stefan, for helping us see how localization, language access, agentic AI are converging, and how together they remind us that communication is more than a transaction. It's both human and it's a human right and also a shared responsibility. So lovely to have you in our podcast, and I look forward to sharing more of this, because as technology unfolds and we adapt, I think we will have more to talk.
Thank you very much, Carol. Pleasure as always.
And that wraps up another enlightening episode of Language Access Matters. We hope you have enjoyed our discussion on the profound impact language access has across various sectors of society. Let's remember that language access is not just an isolated topic. It intertwines with various fields, impacting lives and businesses in profound ways. As we continue this journey together into becoming a more inclusive society where we ensure equal access to services to those who don't speak the dominant language, we want to assure you that our company, Equal Access Language Services, through its podcast Language Access Matters, will be with you every step of the way. We are committed to bringing you thought-provoking conversations, expert opinions, and stories from the field and beyond. To dive deep into the subject matter and engage with leading experts in the field, we will release a new episode of Language Access Matters once a month. By featuring expert practitioners and individuals with diverse experiences, we aim to broaden the scope of our discussions and present a comprehensive view of the importance of language access. We encourage you to stay connected with us through our website, www.equalaccesslanguageservices.com, and our social media platforms. You can join the conversation, ask questions, and share your own stories and experiences. If you want to be part of our podcast, email us to podcast@equalaccesslanguageservices.com. Remember, language access matters to each and every one of us. By understanding its significance and actively working towards its advancement, we can create a more inclusive and equitable society. Thank you for being a part of the Language Access Matters community. We appreciate your support and look forward to sharing more knowledge, inspiration, and empowerment with you in our future episodes.